Hey, welcome back to BUFORD PUSSER, The Other Story. I call it The Other Story because we tell a story that is unlike any of the others told. Instead of going after legends and myths, we are in search of the truth here. And today's episode is going to be about exactly that. We're going to discuss the talking heads of video. Recently, you had a new video that came out on the Discovery Channel, and their talking heads are on there telling us what a great guy Buford was, what a great sheriff he was, all of his accomplishments. But, really, what is the truth? Now, I don't hold anything against the Discovery Channel, nor do I hold anything against Buford Pusser. Buford probably did more to get people into law enforcement than any other person I can think of. But that doesn't make his story true. His legend is just outweighed by the other things that he was into, and that's what I want to discuss. We're going to get into some of the talking heads that will tell you anything that they want you to hear. They're trying to make themselves relevant in this conversation now. One was going to be Robert Broughton, who wrote Ghost Tales of the State Line Mob, and he also wrote a headlines and pictorial book, which contains a lot of documents, and when you first look at it, it really is impressive, but it doesn't match his claims that Buford cleaned anything up, because you go through here and you read this and you say, where is anything about him cleaning up the state line?
The Shamrock Motel was the nexus of all the illegal activity in McNairy County.
The first comment I'd like to make is about Tina Mullis's statement that the Shamrock Motel was the nexus of all the illegal activity going on in McNairy County. First of all, it was just a 22-room motel. There was no meeting place, anything like that. There's nothing that I can find record-wise that indicates that much went on at the motel at all. Whereas over in Mississippi side, in the Shamrock restaurant, they had a facility in the back for parties such as that was much larger. Of course, people could always get together and visit in the restaurant such as that. But, here again, Tina gives absolutely no backing to her story that the Shamrock Motel was the nexus. I mean, that would include things like, moonshining, for instance. State liners were not into moonshining. That was a federal offense. They stayed away from that. But she wants to toss all of that in to what the state liners were doing when it just wasn't true. This video, you see where that they make claims that a lot went on at the Shamrock in the way of gambling, alcohol, drugs, prostitution. Well, that's only partially true. Nobody denies that they sold bootleg whiskey. That's what they were known for. I mean, everybody went there to get booze. Also, the gambling that went on there was the razzle game. That was played on the Mississippi side of the border. It was out of Buford's jurisdiction, and there was no organized gambling like that they showed in the movie Walking Tall. I don't know why these people refuse to explore those myths and bring the truth to light. These storytellers are kind of like the gang that couldn't shoot straight. They have difficulty getting even the slightest details stated correctly. For instance, Sonova suggests that the swimming pool and the restaurant were located in Mississippi. That was true for the restaurant, but the pool was in Tennessee, right behind the motel. How do you get that confused? If you'd like to keep these videos coming and learn more about the real story of Buford Pusser, please hit like, comment, share, or subscribe. In this next clip, you'll hear Tina Mullis as she describes Louise Hathcock as being an evil person. Now, at the same time, you're going to hear Sonova Cantrell talk about how that Louise would take advantage of you any way she could. It would be at her gaming tables. She would drug you, take all of your belongings from your hotel room, and she would feel justified in doing
stuff out of her hotel room. She was going to feel justified in doing so.
Now I have to be curious about how that you could call Louise Hathcock an evil person, but you didn't apply the same set of standards to Buford, because both of them were just about equally skilled in making people's lives miserable if they wanted. Also, if you'll notice, Sanova makes a suggestion again that she would take advantage of you at her gaming tables, which we've already discussed. There were no gaming tables there, just the razzle game, and how that she felt justified by from stealing everything from your hotel room. Now, here again, she offers no proof that that happened. The only time that we know of that that did occur was when George and Dorothy Vogel stopped in there, and they claimed to have been robbed, and that was the day that Buford shot and killed Louise. In this next video clip, you're going to see Steve Sweat, a local historian, talk about how that Louise would wear a carpenter's apron with a ball-peen hammer concealed inside. And he goes on to say that if somebody got out of line, did something that Louise didn't like, she would pull out that hammer and use it on him. He would describe that often those blows would be fatal. Now, my question is, how does he know this? I mean, again, where is the documentation? What was Buford doing if she was doing this? I mean, you would think that he would be investigating crimes and there'd be documentation, but there is none. The claim is easy to make and a lot harder for them to prove.
From all the people I've talked to that witnessed this stuff firsthand, they said that Louise wore a carpenter's pouch around her waist, and one of the things she carried in that pouch was a hammer. And if you got too rough in her place or you were doing something she didn't like, you got an application of that hammer, and sometimes it was fatal. And that's evil. That's as bad as it gets.
Now this next clip is kind of funny to me because Sanova Cantrell is describing the Shamrock location as a spooky and intimidating site. Now, I've been there several times. I find it to be nothing more than a vacant lot. But after that, she says something that's strange. She says, "Do you know how many people died here?" Well, Sanova, my question for you would be, how many is that? I can think of two. Louise allegedly killed her husband, Jack, but I think it was Towhead White that did that. And Buford Pusser shot and killed Louise there. That's two. Do you know of more? If so, where's your documentation about all these people that were killed there? Now listen carefully to this next clip. There's a whole lot to take in, but pay attention. There's going to be a lot to discuss when it's completed.
It's a very scary place to know how many people.
Okay, let's start off with the statement that was made that the Shamrock, the property there, was scary and intimidating. Now, I don't know if they're trying to be melodramatic or what, but I don't know about you, but I've never been afraid of a vacant lot. There's nothing been on that for several years now. At any rate, then they move on to the point where Robert Broughton describes what went on at the state line as like a deer hunter waiting on a deer or his prey. Well, you know, you hear the stories, but other than like with the razzle game, you don't hear much backing to any of these things. You got to wonder why. Then there was the individual that was describing a trucker, how they would stop at the state line, maybe for a burger and beer. They'd be drugged while they were there. Somebody would slip a pill in their drink. And while that they were passed out, they'd have all their money taken, have their anything they owned taken, even their clothes at times, he said. And then they would take the contents of the trailer and steal it as well. And of course, they said that this happened hundreds of times. Now think about that for just a minute. Hundreds of times. Where's the documentation to support such a claim? It's one of those things where you have to ask yourself, now, if Buford was really cleaning up the state line and doing his job, wouldn't we see documentation where this was going on? It was interstate, right across the state line, so, you know, wouldn't there be some federal agency that would be looking into that? But yet you don't see it anywhere. Uh, then we get into the part where that Broughton is describing the Shamrock as, you know, a bloody place, a place of death. Well, we only know of the two people that were killed there. And then, of course, we had the announcer comes on, and he talks about how that the state line was actually run by the state line mob and the Dixie Mafia, and no one could seem to combat them in any way. But back in those days, there was no Dixie Mafia, actually, not yet. That name was coined sometime later. And at the same time, the closest you're going to come to finding a Dixie Mafia person there would be Towhead White. He was suspected of being Dixie Mafia later on. But you don't hear or see any documentation about all these other people being there. Nothing on Kirksey Nix or any of those folks, Mike Gillich. It's just all stuff to, make the story sound better than what it actually is. Sonova would go on to talk about how that Louise would harm people and have their bodies dragged to different parts of the property by their bouncers. Well, where did she get that information, and why can we not find any record of that sort of thing happening? She's claimed that it was done to mess up the jurisdictions about who would be investigating. And then, of course, Steve Sweat comes on and says, well, people in Mississippi felt like that was a Tennessee problem, and the law enforcement officers in Tennessee felt like it was a Mississippi problem, so nobody got involved. Well, if Buford was doing his job, why wasn't he checking in about all these truckers and trying to solve that problem? Same way with, all these bodies that were being discovered. Why is there no record of all these bodies? I mean, if they were killed like was implied, there ought to be police reports about all these unsolved deaths down there, but you don't find anything. And then Sonova ends up by saying, they got away with murder. But here again, she doesn't state whose murder, who was involved, who the victim was, anything. So, here again, it's just more myth and legend than anything else.
She lures Jack here one night under the pretense of getting back together. So he comes here thinking he has a chance with the woman he loves. His one weakness in life was the fact that he loved a vicious woman. And she shot Jack, and he stumbled out here. She walks out and literally laughs in his face. And he says, why? And she said, because she hated him. So he literally bled out on his own property, knowing that the woman he gave everything for hated his guts and wanted him dead.
Okay, you've just heard from Sonova Cantrell about how Jack was killed. Now, first of all, we do know that Towhead White was in the room when Jack was killed. Now, her story is that Jack was lured into her room in hopes of getting back together with Louise. They had been divorced for 7 full years. At the same time, she and Towhead White had become an item. So I don't know why that Jack would be thinking, well, she's going to dump the younger Towhead White for me. None of this makes sense. I mean, here again, we're into fantasy stuff. Then she talks about how that Louise killed Jack, how he walked out of the room, he stumbled over toward the restaurant area, fell just short of his car, just inside the Tennessee state line. And she walked up and he said, why? And she let him know that it was because she hated him and she wanted him dead. Now, I would like to know how Sonova knew that he asked why, and how that she knew what Louise's response was. And these are little things you have to think about whenever you're getting into this story. You just can't take things at face value. Uh, don't believe any of this happened at all. Now we're going to hear how Tina Mullis described Buford watching as a youth. He was a teenager at the time, went down the state line with some friends, and allegedly he was sitting there when Louise and a sailor got into it. She took out her ball-peen hammer, she beat him to death, and so on. Well, I don't know. I don't think that story has any truth to it because I was able to locate the family members of that sailor. His name was Kenneth Wayne McCoy. He was from Walnut, Mississippi, right there close by. He was home on leave at the time. He did go into one of the clubs, but it wasn't either the Shamrock or the White Iris. This was before either of those existed. They did have a little fracas, but it was between Towhead White and McCoy. Towhead said, let's take this outside. They decided to go a little ways away from the club. They went down to a dirt road about a quarter of a mile or so away. And McCoy would be getting out of his car when Towhead hit him in the back of the head and knocked him unconscious. When McCoy came through, he had been beaten, kicked, stomped, and Towhead had apparently run over his legs whenever he pulled away from that site. Know this because Earl McCoy, his son, sent me a photograph of his dad on crutches. And he told me that, yeah, he spent some time in the hospital there in Memphis, and that, it was quite an ordeal for his dad. His dad did go on to serve in both the Marines and the Navy. He was an aviator in the Navy. He ended up flying both helicopters and A-4 Skyhawks. And when he got out of the Navy, he opened a business in Pensacola, Florida. And, according to both Kenneth Jr. and Earl, their father passed away in November of 2012. So I don't think that, Buford saw what he claimed he saw. Made for a good story, made for more legend, made for a big myth, but it's just simply not true.
When Buford was a teenager, he and some friends went down to the restaurant, and they witnessed Louise take her ball-peen hammer out of her pocket and beat a sailor to death with it. He saw firsthand how ruthless and dangerous she was. She had no regard for anyone's life.
So again here, I would just suggest that Tina is just taking the word of W.R. Morris and others who've told this story. It's been regurgitated over the years, and she's happy with it, so that's what she said on camera. At any rate, that takes us on up to Robert Broughton and Sonova Cantrell talking about campaign promises. Let's listen to that one next.
His campaign pledge was,
If you elect me, I'm going to clean up the state line. I'm going to make McNairy County a safe place to raise your children.
and I will get rid of those moonshiners.
Cleaning up the state line was a campaign promise made by most candidates back in those days. It never really happened. It didn't happen under Hugh Kirkpatrick. It didn't happen under Coleman. It didn't happen under Dickey. And then, Buford makes the same promise. Well, now you have to ask yourself, honestly, what places did Buford shut down? What state liners did he send to prison? I can't think of any. And there's no documentation that shows that he fulfilled those promises, but yet the legend keeps repeating he cleaned up the state line. I'd just like for these people to show a little proof of that. Now let's see what Broughton and Sonova Cantrell has to say about Louise offering Buford a bribe to look the other way so she could do business as usual. Now there's others that will disagree with this version of the story because they said that Louise did indeed pay Buford and Buford did indeed accept. As a matter of fact, when I interviewed family members from both the Hathcock and Anderson sides of the family, both told me, yeah, Buford did take money. And it was often more than the 1,000. Usually it was more like 1,500, and on one occasion they recalled that there was a sum of about $2,500 exchanged hands. And, you know, Louise was no exception to this. Buford took money from everybody. It didn't matter if they were club owners, beer joint operators, bootleggers, moonshiners. Buford was taking money, and all their stories were very similar, and they would point out very quickly that they were not a syndicate. They were actually competitors, and one even told me that, you know, if he had an opportunity, he would burn his competition out just to get a better market share. So, you know, I'm having to throw the bright yellow BS flag on this one. Now let's get into the story of carrying the big stick. You know what Tina didn't bother to tell us was that that was about the only time that Buford used a stick. As a matter of fact, when they were making the movie Walking Tall, I'm told that they had to shut the set down for one day because when Buford found out that the stick had been incorporated into the movie, that was his weapon of choice, he just became absolutely angry. And like I say, they had to shut the set down, give him time to just cool off. Also, as far as the story of the stick goes, you know, Tina tells us that he didn't carry a firearm the first 3 years that he was sheriff. Now, I have to question that as well because, you know, it was only about 18 months into his first term as sheriff that he shot and killed Louise. Didn't beat her to death with the stick. She was shot with a .41 Magnum handgun. So you do have to ask about that and say, why are you telling this story that it was 3 years?
Wouldn't leave Louise Hathcock alone. He was always coming back, and he was closing in on her and ruining her business.
Well, Tina got this one partially right. Buford was down at the Shamrock quite a bit. However, it was for the purpose of entertaining his girlfriends that he would take down there to a room he kept. Of course, you know, Louise's niece would share with me that when she was a young teen, the thing that she hated most about being there at the Shamrock was having to take food and drink to Buford's room while he was entertaining one of these women. Now, I have no idea why that this entire legend has been inflated the way it is. You know, they tell what a good person Buford was and you know, how he cleaned up the state line, but yet when you challenge them and you ask them to name a place that he actually shut down or a person that he actually sent to prison that was associated with the state line, they can't do it. And I believe that's because none of it ever happened. At any rate, I would encourage everybody, I'd like to hear your comments. I'd love to know what you think, like to know what you want to hear about the real story. At any rate, I will be back on with another video a little bit later this week. It's going to be one where I'm taking portions of interviews that I've done with the various people and letting you hear some of those. Anyway, we will catch you then.